Till now, we learnt about chemical reactions and we have seen what are the observations that you normally see when a chemical reaction is happening, correct? Now, in this session, we will try to understand how the chemical reaction is actually happening. Okay, we know that a chemical reaction is a chemical change. So that means in a chemical change, new substances are formed, correct? So if the new substances are formed, then if I can explain you how this new substance is formed, then that is the exact explanation for how the chemical reaction is actually happening, correct? So to explain this, to understand this, we have to understand one simple concept of differentiating substances. So if I have a substance A and B, how do I differentiate these two substances are different? So to explain this, I will take one example. Okay, so let's take oxygen and similarly water. My question here is, are these two substances same or different? Definitely you will say they are different. Here the question is, why are they different is the question. So if we look at this oxygen and water, oxygen exists as oxygen molecule, that is O2, correct? Similarly, water exists as H2O. That means oxygen is made up of two oxygen atoms, whereas water is made up of two hydrogens and one oxygen atom. You told me these two substances are different. The reason why you told me these two substances are different is because the composition of the atoms in these two substances are different. That means here oxygen is made up of two oxygen atoms, water is made up of two hydrogen and one oxygen atom. So I can tell that two substances are different if they differ in their composition. Understood? So if they are differing in their compositions, then the two substances are different, correct? Now, in a chemical reaction, reactants are reacting together to form products. Okay? We know that products are the new substances that are formed from the reactants. So if these are the new substances, then the composition of this new substance should be different from that of the reactant because they are not same now. Then the composition of the atoms in the substances must be different, correct? Then how can the composition of the substance in the reactant and the substance in the product be different is the question. If I can tell you, if I can explain you how the composition is changing, then my job is done, correct? So to explain and to understand this much better, we have to understand first about reactant and the product. Reactants and the products both are substances which are made up of atoms, just like your oxygen and water, correct? Now if you look at oxygen, oxygen is made up of two atoms, water is made up of three atoms. Similarly, reactants can also be made up of any number of atoms. Now here the question is, the most important part is how the atoms in water, for example, three atoms are combining together to form a single entity is the question. So to explain this, there is only one way how they can be together. That means there has to be some force which is actually holding them together, which is responsible for these atoms to be together, to be as a single entity, correct? That is what we refer to as a chemical bond. Chemical bond is a force which actually holds these three atoms together. Similarly, oxygen, two atoms together. So that means your reactants are made up of atoms and these atoms are held together by some forces which we are telling it as a chemical bond. So now what's happening in a chemical reaction? New substances are formed. So that means the composition of the substance is changing. So to make this happen, obviously this attraction that is actually holding this reactants together must be broken. So only if you break them, then they can again intermix with one another and combine to form a different composition of atoms. Is it true? So that is possible by breaking the bonds, breaking the chemical bonds between the atoms of the reactant, and then they intermix together, then they will form new substance. Do you understand this? The formation of new substance happens by the breaking of bonds between the atoms of the substance that is reactant, and those are intermixing with one another and forming a new composition of atoms, which we are referring to as a product, which is a new substance. Understood? So let me explain with you with one example which we have already seen. For example, if I am taking magnesium, magnesium is made up of magnesium atoms and oxygen is made up of oxygen atoms. So when these two react, it forms a new substance that is MgO. And I know this is a new substance because the composition of this magnesium is only one magnesium atom. Similarly, oxygen is only two oxygen atoms, whereas this MgO has one magnesium and one oxygen atom. So this is different from this. Similarly, this is also different from this. Hence, the reactants are forming products. Understand this? So this is how a chemical reaction actually happens. Understood? Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next session.